What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Dancers or Athletes Do podcast, where we discuss the athletic aspects of dancing. I'm your host, Slim B. In this episode, we have as guest Dr. Marijeanne Liederbach. Doctor, how are you doing?
I'm well. Such a pleasure to meet you, and I'm very excited about your program.
Thank you. I'm also very happy to have you on the show. For the people who don't know you yet, could you maybe introduce yourself, say who you are, what you've done so far for dancing, and so on?
Sure. So, as Slim B said, my name is Dr. Marijeanne Liederbach. I am a former dancer, choreographer, who was dually excited about healthcare and medicine during my entire performing career. Mm-hmm. And so at some point, the inspiration to shift my focus and go back to school came to be part of my life. So I started out in healthcare as a certified athletic trainer. For those in the audience who don't know what that is, if you can imagine a professional football game or the Olympics or something, and an athlete goes down on the field, the certified athletic trainers are and along with their physician teammates, healthcare teammates, run out to the field or the arena to take care of the athletes. So I'm certified in that domain. And I did that in the early 80s and then became a research associate for Dr. Jim Nicholas, who runs a famous institute. Now, his predecessors run a famous institute called the Nicholas Institute of Sports Medicine here in New York. And as part of that small team, I became the athletic trainer for the Joffrey Ballet for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in that period of time, I decided to go to physical therapy school to amplify my learning and to hone my manual skills. And then after that, I was very, very fascinated with technology and went back to school to finish my PhD in biomechanics. Yeah. So that's where we are now. In 1993, the medical director of the Harkness Center for Dance Injuries, which was a new program at a competing hospital to the one where I was currently working, headhunted me down to run this program along with him. So, so I've been here for almost 30 years, and it's been a fascinating journey. When we opened the center, we had a teeny little office in the basement of the hospital and no computers. We had a handful of dancers who we were treating. Mm-hmm. And we kept their information on index cards in a recipe box, a little tin recipe box, such as one that your grandmother might have kept. Mm-hmm. Today, we're a family of 26 healthcare professionals with 4 different locations, large locations in the hospital, all with state-of-the-art equipment. So we've come quite a long way.
Yeah, I can imagine. Great. You already mentioned the Harkness Center of dance. That's also the reason why I invited you to talk about that, because you're the director of the center. Can you explain on a high level what the center does, what it provides, what its goals are?
Yeah, you bet. So I'll read to our formal mission statement, which is that Harkness Center for Dance Injuries is here to enhance the health, well-being, and quality of life of dancers and dance companies by providing breakthrough approaches to injury prevention, advanced medical treatment, education and training, and state-of-the-art research. Probably the most important thing is a critical part of our mission is that no dancer is ever turned away due to inability to pay for any service that they need.
Yeah.
So, a large part of the responsibilities of myself as director is to make sure that we propose grants and win money to sustain ourselves to meet that mission. We envision our structure as having 3 pillars. If you imagine a Venn diagram with overlapping circles, we have a medical area, an education focus, and a research focus. And we believe ardently that research is the basis of everything else that we do. So we're a very evidence-based practice. We want any dancer or dance company who wants to retain us as a contract for Backstage care, for example. We want them to know that we work from the evidence and we work from their best interest financially and from a healthcare perspective. And importantly, from a biopsychosocial healthcare perspective. So, of course, we're going to talk a lot today about the physical manifestation of injuries that we see with dancers and athletes as artistic athletes. But there's so much psychosocial stress on dancers and such an interesting tradition of dance that's different than sport, which we'll get to, that there's actually more evidence in support of the fact that the psychosocial factors impact healthcare more so than what we know about biologic source of injury at this point. So it's all so fascinating. So yeah, that's pretty much what we do from a strategic point of view. Then I can go into the services we offer or the focus of our research, if you'd like.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that a little bit later. So I want to circle back to what your specific role is as director. So do you lead the group? Do you create a strategy, or what can we specifically see as your role, like on a day-to-day basis? Is it mostly getting grants? Is it mostly supervising researchers and so on? So what can we actually think about when we read a director of Harkness Center as your role?
It's a great question, but I wear many hats. I definitely do the strategic planning. I definitely do the grant writing. We're lucky to be in a large medical center, so we have what's known in America, I'm not sure about in Europe, as the development office. So the people who do that full time is their job, grant writing and proposals for individuals and foundations. So I work closely with them. I do with one of my colleagues, I do the annual budget. But I also run the research lab. I also, as I said, supervise and collaborate with fellow researchers. Our little research team helps mentor the clinicians who want to do research and maybe don't have as much background as we do in how to go about that with our ethics panel. Oh, golly, let me think of some other things. Those are probably the big broad brushstroke things. We, of course, are, as a medical center, are subject to all sorts of regulatory agencies. So we work closely with our infection prevention and control people, certainly amplified during this period of the pandemic. I vet all of the educational content, make sure that everybody's working in a robust fashion with evidence from the most recent literature. And that we integrate that into translated information that's very relevant and useful for the dancers, dance educators, and all the stakeholders in the community. And we're very committed to educating not only dancers and the dance community, but also our fellow healthcare providers, so that we can expand the reach globally for dancers to be able to access the kind of care that we're able to do here in New York with 30 years of experience. So we try to help not shortcut that, but give a very clear pathway for healthcare providers to find education on their level.
So specifically, and because you said, we do research, medical, biomechanics, and so on. So why was the center specifically created, and why could it not be part of an existing center, for example, maybe a sports center in general? So why was a specific center for dance needed?
Oh, great question. We were founded back in the 80s, and back then it was very different in America than it is today with the Affordable Care Act. Back then, almost no dancer had any form of insurance whatsoever. And of course, patching together jobs to make an income that would allow them to sustain their life in New York, as we like to refer to as the dance capital of the world. But so many dancers were coming here and just scraping together jobs and trying to live in this very expensive city while having no insurance. And of course, back then there was also very little information about dance as an activity in terms of what kind of, like, just the basic epidemiology, what kind of injuries were happening, how often, how could we patch together data to understand the causes to therefore be able to mitigate against the risk of these injuries occurring. So the medical director of our center, Dr. Donald Rose, became acquainted with the executive director of the Harkness Foundation for Dance. And together they brought a proposal to the executive level team at our hospital. And it was agreed by everybody that we should get started. So it was very, sort of a very handshake, grassroots initiative that took hold. And it was a problem because without the center and the mission that no dancer be turned away and that we find a way to make that happen. Dancers couldn't afford doctors. And as it turned out, the doctors who were helping the dancers were doing it pro bono. And eventually they couldn't afford it either because there were a need for imaging study, like very expensive procedures ultimately. So we needed to find a way to build a bridge.
Yeah, great. That you say that you don't want to turn down any of the dancers. So so the hospital that you mentioned, which specific one is that in New York that you're affiliated with?
We are called the Langone Orthopedic Hospital, and we're part of NYU Langone Health System.
Great. When I read in research, for example, something about dance, when study subjects are used, in most cases it are ballet dancers. But for the center, do you focus on ballet dancers or dancers with a specific style, or can everybody in different styles come to the center and get information, education, medical care from you?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because you're right. We're really interested in world dance and all forms of dance. We see everybody from age 8 to age 90 and in every form of dance. So, but a lot of the literature has been based on ballet dancers, and there's a simple reason why. The movement form is codified, and from the beginning of literature in dance medicine, it was easy to gain access to a standardized denominator group of dancers who were all doing the same thing. The language was, you understand the language and the vocabulary and the exposures pretty uniformly. But there were so many more dance medicine and science and somatics researchers now who are embracing looking at other forms of dance. We're certainly very, very interested in that ourselves.
Yeah. So it's actually it was a little bit more convenient to do research on ballet dancers, just because you could actually just walk to a company and say, okay, give me 30 ballet dancers, and you know that if they're in the same group, they have the same level and like the same hours of dance and the same technique and the same understanding. If you say do plie, and they will all do it in the same way, and it's easier to do tests on those groups than picking random dancers from the street, basically, for a study.
Yeah, exactly. But it's exciting to see. There's definitely more and more research coming out on contemporary dancers, on street dancers, on dancers from other cultural forms. It's really fun to see the field emerging and people tackling those problems. If you don't have a standardized environment, how on earth do you go about this?
Yeah, I can imagine that it's not so easy to conduct those studies. You already mentioned like the high level services that the center provides, and one of them that you said was injury prevention program, and that you offer. So can you explain what it is? Like, how is it constructed? For who is it created? And how does it work? Do you get like workshops, one-on-one classes? So what can people imagine when they say, okay, I sign up for an injury prevention program?
Great question. So we believe very much in proactive care as well as reactive care. Reactive care is certainly necessary, but if we want to, from the epidemiology we have done and started to understand some risk factors, we wanted to take a whack-a-mole and get those taken care of a priori. So we have two programs. One we call the Injury Prevention Assessment, or IPA. That's a grant-funded program, which is a one-on-one, free of charge, 1 hour long session between one of our athletic trainers or physical therapists and any dancer who calls and sets up an appointment. We have traditionally done those in person, but with COVID, with the pandemic, we also pivoted to telehealth, and we're able to offer these with video conferencing. And to our amazement, they worked out really well, because we're hands-on people, right? As caretakers and also as movers. But it was really exciting to see that was successful. And the silver lining of it is now dancers from around the world can reach us, as opposed to those in our region or who fly in from neighboring state or different area to come in and see us. So, but that's, as I said, it's free of charge for the dancer. What we do is gather some of their movement history, some of their information ahead of time through a survey about their concerns and their aims for coming to the session, so that we spend the hour really well with them. And it can go a couple of different ways. Some dancers will come in with a concern they want to talk about with regard to maybe some struggles they're having in their workplace or with their nutrition and body weight. And so we can spend the hour with them simply going through that and providing the dancer with some referrals and resources that are appropriate. But most dancers want to come in and just say, hey, how prepared am I to do my job or to do my training? And so we've constructed a series of tests, like a battery of physical tests that we take them through to look at how their body is moving overall and how they compare to some validated tests that we know from the literature. So it can go any couple of ways, but most of the dancers who do this want to come in and have a full circle conversation. They want to go through the battery of tests and get a sense of how fit they are to dance. But then also have a chat about these other factors that might be concerning them.
Yeah. So that's then the assessment. So after that, do they get like a plan of what they should do or should not do, or maybe should come back for certain treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. They leave that very day with a plan of action.
Okay.
It's therapeutic exercise. Often it's a referral to either a nutritionist, a psychologist, an orthopedist, a primary care sports medicine doctor. It just depends on what they need. We certainly look for any kind of red and yellow flag during those sessions to make sure that we're not missing anything with a performer.
Yeah. And do you also, within the program, give maybe guidance to healthcare professionals that you say, or maybe coaches or trainers of dancers that you say, okay, if a person behaves like this or this may be something that you should look at, or is that rather out of scope for these types of programs?
So, in other words, do you mean if the dancer gives us a history of something they're doing? That maybe we address the question again.
It's more in the sense, like, let's say that I'm a teacher and I want to learn more about injury prevention. Is it also then useful that I also go to the program and get maybe then a different view on things, or is it purely for dancers who want to do something for themselves that come to the program?
That's a great question. We take teachers absolutely are welcome. And it's one of our favorite things to do because the teachers are the first point of contact with the dancer. And interestingly, there was one study that was published that asked a series of dancers, when you get injured, who do you turn to? And the number one answer was my teacher.
Yeah, indeed.
And then the second answer was my friends. If I have a friend who had the same injury, I asked them what they did. And then lastly was a physical therapist or a healthcare provider.
Yeah.
So the teachers are critical. The teachers are so hungry for this information. So they can certainly come to the one-on-one assessment. Or we also offer, you mentioned a workshop. We have also what we call the IPW, which is the Injury Prevention Workshop.
Okay, yeah.
And that's where we do these all the time. They're very popular. We teach groups of students and often with their teachers. For a nominal fee of our travel time to go there, or we can do it virtually. It depends. We try to make it, again, very affordable and accessible to the community. But we work with a lot of students, either at conservatories, universities, high schools, High School of Performing Arts. You name it. We go to studios all the time.
Yeah.
And we focus on a lot of you and I talked a little while ago about dancers as athletes. We talk about some fundamental scientific principles that dancers haven't had the luxury of growing up with, where athletes pretty much from the get-go have been guided by scientific traditions. Dancers have been pretty much brought up under artistic traditions. And so we're trying to respect the art form and encourage the art form to carry on with expanding its creative realm, while also embracing the principles of sports medicine and scientific, fitness, exercise science, to be able to enhance their performance in and of itself, but also extend their longevity as professionals.
Yeah, because sometimes I have the feeling that when you say that dancing, or that you say to someone dancing is a sport, and they say, no, it's an art, but it's basically both things. Because if you see the amount of hours you train, the amount of stress you put on your body, I mean, people get injured, get overused, or break something. I mean, it's not just because you also take an athletic approach to your dancing that it nullifies your artistic part of it. Actually, it's more than an average or a normal athlete, because you always have the creative part that you have to add. It's not just the athletic aspect of the dancing.
Absolutely.
Coming back to the injuries, one of the services that the center also offers is like the emergency care for injuries. How do we see that? Is it something like an ER type of setting that people can just, half an hour, I had this happening in class and now I arrive here, so what should I do? Can you help me? Is it something like that, or is it something else?
Yeah, good question. We certainly do have an emergency room and an immediate care center as part of our hospital, and the physicians who donate their time to work with us at Harkness have a strong relationship with those physicians. So in the event that somebody truly has to get transported into a hospital system to have an acute injury looked at, we have those mechanisms in place. A lot of the injuries happen acutely during performances, and we have contracted relationships with a number of shows and dance companies where we're backstage providing care before the shows, and often will be in the audience during the performance. So that's another style of emergency care. Sometimes the acute injury is not truly a hospital type of emergent presentation. And so what we'll do is get them into one of our Harkness physicians the next day, for example. And we'll provide guidance either on the telephone or video conference with the dancer to help them know how to apply first aid independently during that time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's more like your first line that you can contact if you have an injury that's maybe not necessarily indeed like ER worthy, or how should I put it, but still they want to have some advice on, especially when they have multiple shows probably in a week. If you talk like about Broadway shows, I can imagine they have maybe multiple shows a day. Yes. Even like afternoon, evening, late evening, and so on. So it might make a big difference if they can apply something directly to ease the pain and like avoid further injury. And that's probably like one of the most important things. What types of injuries do you actually see the most when looking at people who come to the center, whether it's like acute injuries or maybe chronic injuries? What are the things that you see the most?
That's a great question too. We have now data since here at Harkness from our clinic since 1989. So we have a lot of information, and some patterns have emerged over that period of time, which are corroborated by data in the literature from other groups who have been looking at injury patterns for a long time. So typically 65% of the injuries are the slow onset, overuse, repetitive stress type injury, and about 35 are the acute injuries or the traumatic injuries that happen, the type we were just talked about that might warrant an emergency visit. By far, in all forms of dance that we look at, lower extremity is the site of injury. In classical forms of dance, by classical I mean the ballet and a lot of contemporary-based forms of dance where we have the most data, foot and ankle tends to be the primary site of injury. But we'll see, compared to the literature on athletes, about 50% of athletic injuries are lower extremity, and about 70% of all dance injuries are lower extremities. So we know there's a bias toward lower extremity in dance. When looking at the literature about street forms of dance, there's definitely a higher trend of upper extremity injuries than in ballet and contemporary dance. But nevertheless, lower extremity still prevails even in those forms.
Yeah. I can imagine like types like breaking where they use their arms just more to put their weight on and so on compared to ballet dancers. Right. I can imagine that then injuries indeed will happen there quicker. You already mentioned the dance clinic. How is it different from the center? Is it embedded in the hospital? What is the relationship there?
Okay. Oh, great. So yes. So in that Venn diagram I mentioned to you, there's a bubble called clinical, a bubble called education, and a bubble called research, which all inform each other. We have several clinical services, if you will. We already talked about the proactive side, which is the injury prevention assessments and workshops. And so that crosses over into our education bubble. But in our clinical services, we do have a dance clinic. We have several dance clinics per week, which are run by orthopedic surgeons and primary care sports medicine doctors. It's literally like going to a doctor's office. It's by appointment. It's sliding fee scale. So it's based on the dancer's insurance and ability to pay. And in those sessions, they'll be seen by the physician, but also by one of our athletic trainers or physical therapist in the room with the physician and the dancer, so that when the physician is done with his or her diagnosis and studies and note writing and such, the physical therapist or athletic trainer is having a chat with the dancer about what their immediate next steps are. In some cases, it's going to be that they definitely need to do on-site physical therapy. Sometimes it's just going home with a plan of care for exercise and a relative rest program, a taper back to return to dance structure. So one of the biggest things for dancers that distinguishes them from athletes is something you alluded to, which is their exposure per week to training. So in the United States, the National Athletic NCAA, National Collegiate Athletic Association, for example, puts a limit on the number of hours a collegiate athlete can train per week at 20 hours per week.
Yeah.
Or no more than 4 hours per day on average, whereas we know dancers are doing twice that much. So when we talked about coming up under scientific versus artistic traditions, the athletes have been given a lot of structure, learning, information about periodization and overtraining and overuse and all these things so that they can be a little smarter about how they're training. They can taper up and get ready for a performance, and they can taper down and rest and recover. In dance, traditionally we've been do your personal best every single day of your life. Get out there and work really hard every day. And that's just not, that's not sustainable. So a lot of what we do when we see dancers in clinic is to help them understand that they'll still be fine. In fact, they'll be better with their training and their performance if they adopt some of these structures, and we help them think through what that looks like. So that's very few, thank goodness, with the right kind of physical therapy. And I'd like to emphasize that not all physical therapy is created equal. With the right kind of specialized physical therapy, we've been able to hold down the need for surgeries to somewhere between 2 and 5% of all the injuries we've seen, all the thousands and tens of thousands of injuries we've seen since our inception. So very few dancers end up in surgery. Most recover fully with the proper conservative care.
That's
and
great.
Yeah, with this education about how to be dance medicine literate for themselves.
So you mentioned the research that you do within the center, and one of the things or the key investigations that you focus on is epidemiology, biomechanics, and like the clinical outcomes. Can you explain what these different words mean? What can we consider part of these different topics?
Sure.
Within research.
So epidemiology is, as we know, the study of the distribution and cause of illness or injury. We're interested in the injury rate and the injury risk. So we, back in 1981, I did with the Joffrey Ballet, established an injury reporting system, a standardized injury surveillance system, much like what the many athletic teams employ. So we have grown that project now. We refer to it as the International Performing Arts Injury Reporting System. It used to be paper and pencil, and then key to disk, and of course now everything is digitized. So it's a program that we house behind the firewall of our institution, and we have all sorts of medical center information technology security layered on top of it. So it's a very fine system now. It's very swift and very fine. And what we've been able to do is capture the exposures of each dancer individually, and then just follow them over time longitudinally to see what's happening, and then start to draw some correlations between the injury onsets. When there's a big surge in injuries for a different denominator group, we can look at the relationship of that to exposures, to costuming, to venue, to so many different things. So that's a big project of ours. We're highly committed to that, and that will be ongoing for a very long time. So that's an example of what we do in the epidemiology realm.
Sorry to quickly interrupt, but you said that it's international. So do you work with other centers across the world, or is it focused only on the ones that you're affiliated with?
So that's a great question. We have had a collaboration with a couple of different organizations over the years. So that can be our system has the flexibility to do that, and we've done that successfully. Right now, we have a person power issue, because to do this, as you can imagine, takes a tremendous amount of concentration and human effort to make sure there are no errors when inputting the data, collecting the data from the dancers and from the organizations who supply us with their exposures. So right now we've got several dozen shows and companies we're handling, and in this system, we work with denominator groups because we have greater control over understanding the exposures of each dancer within a given company, and the things that you and I talked about before. So whether it's a Broadway show, a contemporary company, a ballet company, we have some things we understand about the dancers in those denominator groups.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Okay, so yeah, we're focusing right now on our contracted entities, our denominator groups with whom we work, and we will then open it back up to other users. As one of the things we discovered with our fellow users is it's very important that they also have the human resources in place to do this well. So our platform is free of use to those other entities, but we have to make sure there are quality controls in place for them so that the data is clean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's our big epidemiology effort. We're collaborating with an interesting healthcare group from Mexico on some epidemiologic questions as it pertained to the period of time of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So yeah. So there are other studies going on, but the big one is the use of our iPairs instrument. So that's that. In our biomechanics realm, we do have one of the 4 locations I mentioned that we have is we have a state-of-the-art motion capture lab with force plates, electromyography, high-speed cameras, and so on. And we've done a couple of really interesting studies in there. One was actually my doctoral thesis, which was to compare the biomechanics of landing on a flat surface compared to a rake stage surface. So we validated a ramp to put over our force plates, which looked at a simulated downstage, upstage, stage right, and stage left situation compared to the flat floor, while the dancer was either in their flat shoe or a 3-inch high-heeled character shoe.
Yeah.
So we did a shoe surface interface study. The findings were very, very interesting. We found that there were some really interesting changes of the ankle, but also up at the hip joint when landing in the high heel shoes. So the downstage and stage right floor conditions were they were significant, but the shoe in every single condition when the dancer put on the high heel shoe just was highly, highly significant for changes in the biomechanics at the foot and ankle and then up at the hip.
Yeah.
So that's one example of a study we did there. Another big effort has been to appreciate, we did it, let me go back for a minute. One of our epidemiology studies was to look at how many ACL injuries happened among our dancer denominator groups over a 5-year period of time. It was a prospective design study. And we found that the rate of ACL injuries was extremely small when comparing it to team ball sports. We also found that there was no sex difference between the men and the women in terms of the occurrence of ACL injury, which very different, as you know, from what we know in the sports world. We know that women athletes are at a higher risk, statistically significantly higher risk of sustaining an ACL injury than their male counterparts. So we really wanted to know why. So what we did was study 80 subjects, 40 dancers compared to 40 team ball sport athletes on the elite level, 20 men and 20 women in each sub-cohort. And we looked at the way they landed from jumps, because the mechanism for injury in all these non-contact ACLs is landing from a jump.
Yeah.
And that was true in the dance community too, even though they had so many less. In almost every case, it was from landing from a jump. So what we did was look at the mechanics. Just looking at mechanics, period, we found that there was a very big difference in the coronal plane of motion, frontal plane motion activity in particular at the hip and knee. And that from a sagittal point of view or a sideways point of view, there was much less active utilization of the foot and ankle complex when landing. So the dancers were able to soften their impact by taking more time and rolling through their foot and ankle joints more than the athletes were. And then the second study we did was to look at the athletes again, but in a pre-fatigue and a post-fatigue condition. And so what we found across the board was that all the subjects, their mechanics, the cleanliness of their mechanics eroded with fatigue, but it took the dancers twice as long to fatigue as it did the athletes. So the dancers are doing something very right in terms of focusing on alignment from a very, very young age, but also the number of jumps they do and the quality control of their jumping and the angular as well as linear nature of their jumping turns out to be protective for them.
Yeah.
So something that can be very helpful to the athletic community that we've been working on. And yeah, so that's an example of some of our biomechanics. Right now, another really interesting thing we're doing is spending time analyzing pedestrian as well as dance-specific movements, looking at a multi-segment model of the spine. So traditionally in biomechanics, until very recently, the spine has been analyzed, we call it as analyzed as if it were a brick. So the reflective markers might be on the shoulders and on the greater trochanter and iliac crest, but nothing in between that. So what we've been doing is looking at the different regions. So the cervical thoracic, the thoracolumbar, lumbar pelvic, and pelvic to hip relationships, and finding some really interesting differences in terms of the finesse of how the spine moves. So that's a new venture for us. The data analysis is very complicated, but it's fun.
Yeah, can imagine.
We're lucky to work with folks like you who are very smart in math and computer science to help us get that work done.
Yeah. So for the center, you already mentioned what you're working on. So what are actually future plans? Are there any big projects coming up for the center in the near future that you can already share, of course?
Yeah, so one of them relates back to the outcomes area of our in our research focus. We're very, very interested in wireless and wearable technologies.
Yeah.
So we're looking at we're working with two different technology colleges here in our area to gather some of that data. That's really fun. And we're comparing that to some psychologic domain outcomes, how people are feeling in terms of fatigue and performance. So that'll be really fun research to complete. We are having our physical therapy space renovated. So we're dealing with moving people about because of construction. So that's good. We just added a new Broadway show, which is Hamilton, to our cadre of shows that we're contracted with to take care of Backstage. So that's going to add another team of denominator group data to our IPAIR study and to the pull on our time to be present as clinicians. So those are the main things we're focusing on right now. And also, of course, the pandemic, the outcome, one of the outcome studies we're looking at is the effect of any kind of long haul disease for the dancers who unfortunately were infected with COVID, and just following them to see how they do and how they return to dance and be able to help other communities around the world who have had dancers also exposed to COVID. We've been doing a lot of safe return to the studio, working with different companies on bubbles as they return back to the stage. Which, heaven forbid another surge with the new variant. Things will go forward with dancers being able to resume their place in the workforce and the cultural force.
Yeah, hopefully everything gets better, maybe slowly, but eventually that we can all dance and enjoy dance wherever we want it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Before we say goodbye, how can people get in touch with the center or with you if they want to get more information about what you're offering and maybe how they can work with you if they want to?
Sure, you bet. So any questions by email can simply go to Harkness at NYU Langone.org. People can visit our website, which is danceinjury.org. And also, I didn't mention, but something that's a really great resource is a public-facing educational portal that we have called dancemedu.org. When people sign on to that, there's a little page where we ask them to create a free account so that we can communicate with them. But once on there, there are all sorts of educational modules that are available for healthcare professionals and dancers and dance educators alike. So that's something that's really fun for dancers to discover and dance educators to discover. So again, that's dancemedu.org. Those are probably the three best ways to get, and also our phone number, which is in US code 212-598-6054.
Yeah, great. For the people, I will also drop this information in the show notes, so you can just click there if you want to get in touch with the center. Dr. Thanks a lot for all the information you provided. I mean, had some more questions, but yeah, we are on a tight time schedule here. So yeah, good luck with your research, of course, also with the center. And yeah, I'm really excited to hear what new things you discover in the research and how you can help dancers better.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, congratulations on your work, and I look forward to staying in touch with you. We'll talk again.
Yes, hope so too. Bye-bye.
Great. Bye-bye.
If you want to know more about podcast, you can find us on social media. We are at DAAT Podcast. DAAT stands for Dancers or Athletes Too. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also check out our website at daatpodcast.com. I'm also on social media. Surprise, surprise. You can find me at This Is Slim B. Thanks for listening, and I hope you tune in again for our next episode. Take care. Kobo out.